Meet Mrs. Sarah Thompson, a 78-year-old African-American woman who has faced many trials in her life. Yet nothing could have prepared her for the humiliation that awaited her on what was supposed to be a simple trip to the grocery store. With her husband, Mr. Thompson, bedridden and reliant on her care, Sarah found herself in the awkward position of buying adult diapers. As she approached the checkout, her anxiety spiked. Little did she know, a police officer in line behind her was about to turn her mundane errand into a spectacle of ridicule. Just when Sarah thought all hope was lost, an unexpected hero stepped in. Before we delve deeper, please comment below where you're tuning in from today. If you find this story engaging, remember to subscribe. The morning sun poured through the faded curtains of Sarah's modest living room. At 78, she moved slowly, her joints creaking as she prepared for her weekly grocery outing. Standing before a small mirror, she adjusted her well-worn dress, a reminder of better times before life threw its harshest challenges her way. Her gaze fell upon a crumpled shopping list in her shaky handwriting, where the last item read, "Adult diapers." A familiar weight settled in her chest, a mix of dread and acceptance that had become a part of her routine. Her eyes shifted to the figure of her husband, Mr. Thompson, lying motionless in their living room. Once a proud veteran, vibrant and strong, he now lay in a body that had betrayed him. A spinal cord injury from his service left him partially paralyzed, relying on Sarah's devoted care around the clock. On the nightstand beside him lay the essentials of their new life: medication, a half-full glass of water, and, of course, adult diapers. The sight of the diapers brought forth a complex swirl of emotions in Sarah: love, duty, exhaustion, and an unshakable sadness. She approached his bedside, her steps slow and deliberate. "I'm heading to the store now, dear," she said softly, her voice filled with warmth forged over decades of companionship. Though he couldn't speak, Mr. Thompson's gaze conveyed a depth of emotions: gratitude, love, and a profound sorrow for the burden he felt he had become. Sarah leaned down, placing a gentle kiss on his forehead. "I won't be long," she promised, her hand resting on his cheek for a moment before she stood up, wincing at the ache in her back. Gathering her old purse and reusable shopping bags, Sarah hesitated at the door, the thought of the trip ahead filling her with dread. The anticipation of judgmental looks and whispered remarks made her want to retreat back into the safety of their home. But the need was urgent. Mr. Thompson depended on her. Taking a deep breath, she squared her shoulders and stepped outside, the weight of her responsibility wrapping around her like a familiar yet unwelcome cloak. As she entered Simmons' Grocery, a long-standing fixture in their small town, the soft chime of the doorbell greeted her. The store, with its narrow aisles and slightly musty scent, felt like a relic of a past era, much like Sarah herself. She nodded politely at the young cashier behind the counter, who barely looked up from his phone. The cashier barely registered Mrs. Sarah Thompson's presence with an indifferent gaze. At 78, Sarah had grown accustomed to this invisibility, a gradual fading from the world's notice that seemed to come with age. Her steps were slow, not only due to the arthritis in her knees, but also out of a desire to remain unseen. She knew the store's layout like the back of her hand, and could navigate its aisles with her eyes closed. However, today, her trip to the hygiene aisle felt like a walk of shame. As she approached the dreaded section, Sarah's eyes darted around, searching for any onlookers. The store was relatively empty, just a few early morning shoppers going about their errands, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being scrutinized. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for a pack of adult diapers, the plastic crinkling loudly in the silence of the aisle. She winced, fearing the noise would draw attention. Clutching the package to her chest, she wished she could hide it, as if that would erase her need for it. The weight of the package felt trivial compared to the burden in her heart. Each step toward the checkout seemed to stretch into eternity, a gauntlet of imagined stares and whispers. Keeping her eyes downcast, she avoided making contact with the few shoppers she passed. As she neared the front of the store, a small sigh of relief escaped her. Soon, this would all be over, and she could return to the safety of home, where judgment couldn't reach them. However, as she approached the checkout line, a knot twisted in her stomach. The line had grown, with more people idly chatting. Taking her place at the end, Sarah tightened her grip on the package, wishing she could disappear into the worn linoleum floor. The line moved slowly, each moment feeling like an exercise in vulnerability. She focused on the floor, counting scuff marks to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. Just a few more minutes, and she could escape this embarrassment. But fate had other plans. As Sarah neared the front of the line, a loud voice sliced through the murmurs of the store, shattering her hopes for an unobtrusive exit. It belonged to a police officer, his crisp uniform an unwelcome reminder of the outside world. He was chatting casually with another customer, his voice echoing in the confined space. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" he said jovially. "Nothing like a bit of sunshine to start the day right." Sarah felt herself tense, her grip on the package tightening as the officer's presence loomed behind her. As she moved closer to the checkout counter, she became hyper-aware of the package in her arms. She tried to angle her body to conceal it, but the crinkling of the plastic echoed in her ears with every small shift. Suddenly, the officer's voice pierced through her thoughts again, but this time with a different tone. "Would you look at that?" he said, his voice lowered yet unmistakably loud. "Buying diapers at her age? Must be for her. Poor thing can't even take care of herself." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow. She froze, her heart racing. The shame she had fought to keep at bay crashed over her like a tidal wave. Around her, she could hear quiet snickers and feel the weight of curious glances. The line, which had felt long before, now transformed into an endless march of humiliation. Trembling, Sarah finally placed the diapers on the counter. Mrs. Sarah Thompson felt her face flush with embarrassment, unable to look up or bear the pity and disgust she imagined reflected in the eyes of those around her. The young cashier, a man with a name tag reading Isaac, stood silently behind the register. If he had any thoughts about the unfolding situation, his expression remained neutral, and his movements were efficient as he began scanning Sarah's items. Each beep of the scanner heightened the tense atmosphere. Sarah wished for the ability to vanish. Each second dragged on like an eternity, each breath a struggle against the tears threatening to spill. The tension in the store was palpable as she stood at the checkout, her body rigid with humiliation. The police officer's mocking words lingered in the air like a taunt. "That's what happens when you get old," he continued, his voice rising just enough for more people to hear. "You start acting like a baby again." The cruel laughter that followed pierced Sarah like a knife. She could feel the weight of curious stares and hushed whispers surrounding her. Her grip on the cart handle tightened until her knuckles turned white. Desperately, she wanted to defend herself, to explain about Mr. Thompson, the sacrifices they had made, and the love that sustained them through each difficult day. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat tightened, choking back the plea for understanding that she longed to voice. For a moment, she considered leaving the store without the diapers. The thought of escaping the suffocating atmosphere of judgment was almost overwhelming. However, the image of Mr. Thompson at home, dependent on her care, flashed through her mind. She couldn't abandon him. She had to endure this for his sake. So, Sarah stood there, silent and trembling, her eyes lowered to avoid meeting anyone's gaze. She focused on the scuffed linoleum floor, counting the tiles in an attempt to steady her breathing and will herself to become invisible. Isaac continued to scan her items, his movements methodical and unhurried. If he was aware of the drama unfolding around him, his face didn't show it. But when his eyes briefly met Sarah's, they held a flicker of concern or perhaps unease with the situation. Encouraged by the lack of resistance to his comments, the officer decided to push further. His voice echoed clearly across the store as he added with a cruel laugh, "Maybe they should have a special line for people who need diapers. Keep them out of the way of the rest of us." This latest jab sent a ripple of shocked murmurs through the onlookers. Some laughed nervously, while others shifted uncomfortably, yet no one spoke up. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady beep of the scanner. Mrs. Sarah Thompson felt as if she were standing on the edge of a precipice, the humiliation threatening to overwhelm her and break down the carefully constructed walls of dignity she had built around herself over the years of caring for Mr. Thompson. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes and she blinked rapidly, determined not to cry in front of these strangers. In that moment of utter desolation, Sarah's mind wandered to Mr. Thompson at home. She thought of his strength and the dignity he maintained even in the face of his debilitating injury. Drawing on that strength now, she steeled herself to endure this moment.